So welcome everyone to the Brave Zebra Spotlight. Today we have with us Shrikkanth Sreedharan, and he's the director, game designer, and programmer of Astronaut Diaries, which is the studio that is now developing Denari. So hello Shrikkanth, how are you doing?
Hey Jorge, doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Nice. I hope everything is good in your morning because you're in New Zealand and I'm Spain. So we thankfully we do not have a lot of delay. So let's jump back into it, okay?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So could you really briefly introduce yourself for anyone like that doesn't know you, and also introduce Denari? How do you describe the game in a few sentences?
Sure. So once again, I'm Shrikkanth. I'm the director of New Zealand-based indie game studio Astronaut Diaries, and we're making a game called Denari. And Denari is a single-player narrative action game about a boy with telekinetic powers who has to fight to save his people from the invasion of an empire. Uh, sort of gameplay-wise, we're taking the isometric hack and slash genre and we're twisting it with the power of telekinesis. So, for instance, if someone throws a grenade at you or something, you can catch the grenade and throw it back. You can push people you can push enemies rather into other enemies and into objects in the environment. And what we think that does is that it turns the enemies on the battlefield into resources that you can use in combat. And story-wise, we're telling I suppose a story about a boy who has to defend his people. So it's somewhat of a coming-of-age story in a sense. And it kind of evokes themes of, you could say, we're all from either an indigenous or immigrant background, and so we're living in this kind of Western secular society. And I think that to us brings up has brought out a lot of internal conflicts about our identity and our place in society, and we try to imprint a lot of those themes into the game as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
That's all right.
I think we will touch on that later. But ladies and gentlemen, that has been like a super quick example of how to do a perfect elevator pitch. So congrats.
All right.
You can tell this is not the first time
Thanks.
that you do this. So it also
Yeah. Yeah, I've edited that pitch a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you talk? We're touching on this earlier, but could you talk a bit about your personal journey into game development? Like, what is your background and how it affected your current work?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm trained as a software engineer, and so I think this is kind of I'm from an Indian background, and there's the this is relevant because I think in our culture we're kind of expected to pick up like one of three careers. It's like doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. And so like I went with okay, cool, engineer, like because I was kind of a maths and science kid a lot, but I also had this creative side, which was that I grew up playing guitar, and I was like, I'd come home and just play guitar for literally 5 hours a day. um and yeah, and so there was these two sort of trajectories I was on. One was the sort of like building cool things, engineering side of things, and then I was also writing a lot of music. I ended up writing music for my friend's indie game at one point. And at that point, I kind of realized that perhaps there was something here in this indie game world that seemed so accessible to like pursue this creative pathway, that also I didn't have to lose the the love of engineering. In indie games you have all of this creative collaboration. It allows you to really scratch that itch, but at the same time you're also like getting your hands dirty and building really cool things. And so I just decided at one point that uh, uh, indie game development kind of created this alignment of my identity. you know uh, and so I decided at some point, uh, 10 plus years ago, this was the thing I had to pursue. And at some point I had to take the leap and do it. And yeah, around so almost like 9 years, I want to say, back a long time ago, I just quit my job, my software engineering job. I was working in the States. I moved back to New Zealand, back into my parents' place, and I just started messing around with stuff. And eventually,
About to
yeah.
ask about that transition because, like maybe when you're getting into game development, you don't feel that yet, but this is like kind of a risky environment, especially at the moment. So how
Yeah.
was that transition for you? Like, was it a difficult choice? And you just said like you completely stopped your day job, or were you having like two lines at the same time or something?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that I would recommend doing what I did if I'm honest, because I mean my logic at the time was that okay, cool. Well, I had done quite well in my software engineering degree. Like bear in mind I loved it. I really enjoyed it, and so I progressed a lot in my career. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, I've got the safety net. I
Yeah,
can always jump back into being a senior engineer, right?
yeah.
And as well as that, at that level, you've got a lot of income, and so I had a bunch of money, saved up, and so I thought, okay, cool, let's just throw it all into this new career. With so that was my thinking, but I'm gonna say, there was like 4 years in, we still hadn't gotten any funding or anything. I had to go and pick up a software contract,
Hmm.
so it put me in that kind of position. Whereas, yeah, I would certainly consider if I was to do it again, actually going and getting a job in the industry, and I have many reasons for that. I don't want to waffle on too much, but I do think that actually having experience with working under other game designers and in the environment of a game development studio,
Hmm.
I think benefits your indie ambitions, and it helps you get funding, I think. And so
Hmm.
that was one thing that we really struggled with, given that I had no prior experience
Yeah.
or a prior credit. It was a real hindrance to finding a publisher. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think the industry, especially like the indie industry, mm, sometimes is so driven by passion that you can kind of forget the other side of it. Like after all, we all talk about business, so in that sense, being able to see how other people work and stuff, it must have been like great for other people to kind of follow. So I would like to know a
Absolutely.
little bit how did that end up like transforming into funding Astronaut Diaries,
Mhm.
and because we were talking about earlier, this is such a small team, but it's also like really diverse. And could you talk us a
Mhm.
bit about that transition of creating the studio and what does everyone bring into the table?
Okay, the transition to create to turning this into a real studio
Yeah,
where we've got people hired and everything, and we're chipping away at a commercial product, right?
definitely.
Um, so initially, it was myself tinkering in my room, and this idea of like proving yourself.
Hmm.
Like there's this idea that I think eventually we think of, okay, cool, I got to be able to prove my ideas to an investor or a publisher. But I think first and foremost, an instinct that I had landed on was that I need to be as good enough as a game designer or programmer in order to attract collaborators, to prove myself
Yeah,
to artists.
yeah.
And there's this idea that there's this principle in game design of gray boxing, right? Where you have like everything. If something looks horrible but it plays well, you know that when you add an art and all that sort of stuff, it's going to be even better, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
and so I thought if I can make an ugly hack and slasher that played well, then I could attract artists. And I think that was a really good instinct. So the very initial versions of Denari, it was like this, being you played it this as this like capsule with a floating sword,
Yeah.
um, and you're fighting spheres and capsules and whatnot with floating axes and arrows,
I've seen
and
some
and
videos. I've did my research.
yeah.
It's so interesting to see
Oh,
like
awesome.
the before and after, and
Mm,
it looks like. I mean, of course, you can see it's not like a polished project or anything, but you can
mm,
almost see the DNA of the project. So, which I think is
yeah.
great that you cracked that nut like super fast.
Mm. Yeah, I think that was a good instinct and it paid off. And I could show it to my now artists, and they'd look at it and be like, yeah, there's actually something here. They can start to visualize, okay, cool, how can I bring the fun out of this
Hmm.
with my work. Um, and so initially I was already friends with Isabel, a 3D artist.
Great.
Um, and she introduced me to Tamihana, who is now our art director. At the time, they were both working at Ninja Kiwi. He's
Hmm.
actually now a publisher, which is we'll get there.
Full circle.
But yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, it was a real cool full circle story there. But yeah, they were working with the Ninja Kiwi, and um, working on Ninja Kiwi titles was great. But I think what they were attracted to kind of the sort of total creative autonomy that you
Hmm.
get in the indie world. And so they were just chipping away at Denari part-time for a long time, you know. I was working away at it full-time until I had to go get contracting work and whatnot, but you know, it was mostly full-time. And we'd meet every Monday evening, just over a call, or sometimes we'd meet in person. And from there, we had to sort of, over very many iterations of funding attempts and things like that, we over many iterations, we got to the point where we started to get to we started to succeed in some of our attempts at funding.
Yeah, because I also guess like especially like you said, like you did not have so much experience before, and now you're trying to get people to work with you and convince them. Like what things do you think like you did great at the start, you know, in these early stages that were like key for this, and what other stuff should you have avoided, you know, like?
Yeah. Okay. There's an, I think there's a anecdote I can think of something that I did right, which was I spoke to Tamihana and Isabel a couple of years after we were working together. I'm like, wait, why did you guys say yes? You know, why? And Tamihana told me that he'd actually worked on a bunch of indie games before, and they kind of went nowhere because, you know, he's an artist and he'd pair up with a programmer, and this sort of like he found that through no fault of his own, it was typically, you know, another partner that he was working with was like, I'm not into this anymore. There was a lot of this like, you know, there was a lot of excitement at the start, and then it would just whittle away. Yeah, but he had said that in that first conversation, somehow I gave off the energy that like, yeah, this game is getting done, right? And so I think that kind of like willingness to be like, no, you know, like there's something here, and we're going to fight to bring that out. I think is the core of why my team really stuck with me, you know. But it also, this is a weird one. It's actually rarer than you think to just be kind and supportive to your team. Isn't that?
But it is, sadly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so yeah. I think that's another one where I so kind and supportive, but also really receptive to creative ideas. You know. Because again, like it's like the entire point of being an indie is that kind of creative autonomy, right? And I think this was probably from my previous career. I kind of picked up this management idea where you can plot out management styles in terms of here is autonomy and alignment. So autonomy being like how are you left to your own devices? You know, or are you micromanaged? You know.
Yeah.
And then alignment, it's like, okay, cool. Well, like, do we all know what direction we're heading? You know. And so I thought it was really important for us for me to be like, okay, cool, to be able to paint a picture of where we're going, but how we get there in your domain, that's up to you, you know. And I might have some like veto rights or whatever it is. I can be like, well, you know, that's not going to work. You know, I can point to no way that's not going to quite work. But generally speaking, everyone's creative autonomy is respected, and so they have a lot to bring to the table, and you know, every opinion is a valid one, you know, and you know,
you and I, Shrikkanth and I, were talking earlier about our past music careers, and I was telling him like I remember like working also in filmmaking and you know, video production, how important it was for me to learn how to manage the egos and the creative impulses of people. And I think although it's like the most difficult part to understand and to control, is also the most beautiful, because after all, especially in the indie scene, people are driven by passion, and that can also like get too much. But this is where you get like this feeling of that you're building something together, and everyone starts shaping it with a different lens and everything, so it becomes fuller and grander and more real, you know. I think that's the beauty, to see the little sprout grow. I think that's the gist of it for sure. So I would like to pick up, because we were talking earlier about prototyping, and I would like to know, because you were also talking about alignment, so I want to know what happened there, because you said that the telekinesis part of it, the telekinesis mechanic, which I've played the demo, it's super exciting and fun to play around. Like, it did not come like first. It was not like a USP from the beginning, right? So how do you introduce that into the alignment and the preview alignment, and how did that, convey that to the team, convince them that this is like the new thing that we need to pursue? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how do I put it? So I think you can pursue game design from like a top-down perspective or a bottom-up perspective, right? So the when I say top-down, I'm thinking, oh, big cool ideas, but then bottom-up would be like, okay, cool, let's try some stuff and then put it in front of people and see what emerges. And I think early on we were very bottom-up. The only thing, the only real identity this game had was like, cool, hack and slash, like that was it, isometric hack and slash, and I was trying to sort of academically even understand what that genre is even all about, and so the mechanics that emerged initially were like, we figured out that this idea of a redirect would be really cool. We like the idea of enemies damaging each other, so we always had this thing that emerged at the start was enemies as resources, enemies, turning enemies' attacks against each other, was sort of at the core there, and that emerged quite early. And as part of that, there was the redirect. And when we're starting to build from there, we actually had this like telekinetic blast, like Dragon Ball Kamehameha thing going on. And if you think about it, like that's got, like we're sort of diverging from anything that could be a telekinetic identity there, right? We're just like, cool, we give them a big blast, And I think it was there when from that bottom up, we're trying to see like what's going to spark here, like what ideas are we encountering that people are enjoying, and the top-down perspective, I think, struck us when we're trying to explain what it is that we're even doing. When you try to put it into a funding application, like write that down in one sentence, like it's like, oh, hack and slash, but enemies damage each other, also Kamehameha, and it's just, when you even try to write it down, it gets very confusing, and then you start to realize that. Yeah, exactly. The identity of this thing is kind of fractured, and when we thought about all of the mechanics that I think that like were really compelling here in the thing that we were building, that redirect, we're like, okay, that there feels like something that we can hone in on further, and we can introduce a telekinetic push and things like that.
I would like to know, because you were saying earlier about the bottom-up approach to it, how you felt like people saw that it was interesting. I want to know who these people is, because we're jumping a bit and I know that you guys have a super active Discord server. So how do you do this when it comes to prototyping? Like, what do you share? This development updates, how do you impact also the players that you expect to have, but your team also, in the sense that they get that push,
That's fair. We started with early prototyping and jumped straight to funding applications, right? And there was a lot that was going on in the middle. And so I guess when I was in the software engineering world, I was exposed to ideas like agile and lean startup and things like that. And in all of those paradigms, it's all about mitigating risk as soon as possible.
Okay.
So I
right?
Yeah. With it's like you build this thing, it into this thing that you've built, you've baked in a lot of assumptions about what is fun and what's not, and your own ego's in there, and you're like, oh, this is the greatest thing, this is the greatest bean hack and slasher ever made, right? And then but if you're self-aware about that, you understand that you have to test those assumptions, and you have to uncover hidden assumptions and things like that. And really, the only way to do it is to put it in front of someone else and shut up, don't say anything, watch them. Yeah. And I think people have many approaches to this. Like, okay, cool, let's put it online and get people to fill out a form and whatever it is. But we thought the best thing that we could do was to observe people playing the game. So in-person expos and meetups and things like that, events and whatnot that we're running in the community here, that was our focus. And we did it so often over. I mean, like, to be fair, before we got any funding or anything, it was like 4 years or whatever it is. So like we it was a long process of build something, go to a meetup or go to an expo and test it, and go back. Sorry, at every expo or convention or anything, we would come away with pages of notes.
Yeah.
And so that was how we iterated on those ideas, right? We had this kind of like this understanding that anything that we come up with must be put in front of someone, and that the best way for us to try and get a sense for whether or not it's working is to observe people playing, and then not necessarily to respond to every single note that we write down, but to actually look for patterns. I think patterns were we had this instinct that, okay, if one person complains about something, maybe it's just down to their taste or whatever, right? But if 10 people, have a problem with that one parry mechanic or whatever it is, and they're not responding to it for the same reason, you can start to pick up on those patterns, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in that situation myself with, some expos or fairs, and you start noting feedbacks, and suddenly you have two completely opposite feedbacks, and you're so desperate about what do I do about this? But yeah, I think it's a super clever way to kill two birds with the same shot, the fact that you got free playtesting basically, and also you start making some noise in the community, getting some maybe big fish's attention if everything goes well. So yeah, super interesting to see your perspective on that. I would like to pivot now because a couple of days ago I played through the demo of Denari, and I would like to focus on the combat side of it and the combat design, because after all, it's the main basis of the demo at the moment. So I have a lot of questions regarding it.
Sure.
I would like to know, especially you said earlier that you were almost analyzing from the theoretical side of it, the genre and stuff. So I would like to know which were your biggest inspirations, other games, but maybe also other media, about how to take the design approach of the combat of the game.
Okay. This is such a deep topic. So
We have time.
But yeah, okay. I'll start here. So the games that I think inspired me early on were Hyper Light Drifter, of course. Brilliant game, beautifully told story, and Kingdom Hearts. And I mean, hear me out. Because there's a moment in both of these games where okay, so in Kingdom Hearts you have the Colosseum, right? You go to the Colosseum world, and I was just fascinated that, okay, cool, like we're in a box here. We're in a box with a bunch of other enemies, and that's all. And yet it's so much fun. So the level design is not doing a lot, right? But there's so much that's interesting about the interactions with every enemy, etc. That it brings out this so much fun, and in a box. And so this idea of fun in a box was really inspiring to me. And then you've got Hyper Light Drifter, and the thing that inspired me so much about Hyper Light Drifter was I think, and in the post-game content, I think it is, they introduced this boss rush mode, right? And the boss rush mode is cool. You start off with your full loadout, everything that you've earned in this game, and then you go and fight each of the bosses. Cool, that's easy mode. And then it tapers it back to okay, cool. You only have some of the weapons and stuff that you might have encountered in this game. Go fight everything, and then they taper it back completely, and they're you just walked in, you have nothing, you have your basic gun, your basic sword, whatever it is, go kill every boss. And I was so fascinated by that. I'm well, what do you mean? And I thought what was so clever was that they walked in with with this idea that you have all of the tools to defeat everyone with the most basic set of mechanics. And so I think those two kind of ways of thinking really influenced how we think about Denari. We should give you a base set of mechanics, but then if we say that a base set of mechanics that you can express yourself completely with. And then it almost like doesn't matter if, what skill tree and whatnot we introduce, and which direction that you customize your character and whatever it is, right? That sort of base set of ideas will serve you, throughout the entire experience. And yeah, so I'll start there. I know that I can well, I tend to waffle here, so but I think that's where we started, with the design of Denari's combat. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think both games have something super important, especially for combat-focused games. That is the fact that they both are super readable, and they have like super clear indicators of VFX, and the animations themselves are super expressive. So I would like to know, how did that influence your work? Like, because I was playing the game and it felt like super responsive, super snappy, the combat. So this is
Cool.
not something that is easy to achieve. So I guess this goes back to what you were saying about that many amounts of iterations. But what are like the principles that you set yourself for having a game that could be easily read and feel fair to the player in that sense,
Yep. No. Yeah. This is great. This is great. Let's start with you're talking about impact, right? I think one of the first things to get right in an action game is collisions. And I think for a new designer or someone who's new to game design, it's like an oddly difficult topic, and the approach we ended up going with. I mean, we did a lot of silly stuff, but the approach we ended up going with was it's quite common in most fighting games and probably a lot of action games, which is you play an animation, and independent of the animation, you've got this sort of like a 3D cutout of where the collision radius is, a collision box, and you turn that on and you turn it off. Yeah. And so it kind of gives this illusion that, oh, okay, cool, I just had this massive sword swing, and look, the sword, it was totally the sword that hit everything, right? But in the background, it's actually just this very easy to understand thing for a designer. Cool, the collider appeared and then it disappeared. And I bring this up because it sounds so, it's like, oh, that's the basics, right? But you'd be surprised how difficult it is to get collision right, So I think that's one thing that's important to focus on. And of course, you've got melee weapons, and then you've got ranged weapons and things like that, and each of them will have a different approach to collision, and there's various approaches to consider, but anytime you introduce a new combat mechanic, it's really important to say, what is it, how can I reliably hit things? Because literally, like, there are approaches we've taken where, like, okay, cool, the collider is on the sword, this is a bad idea, and then the collision is driven by animation. But the thing is, if the animation is going fast enough in a fast-paced hack and slash, you can have, here's your enemy, and here's the animation of the sword in one frame, and here it is in the other, and you end up missing, that hit. And then so nailing an approach to collision was super important, because before that, we chose this to people that really like how fast the game was. But now and again, they were like missing enemies, and that.
Or is that something that was kind of what happened?
I think I think they realized. I think it was pretty good, and it just creates this real sloppiness to the experience, and it's hard to appreciate it. After that, you're like, it feels very amateurish, and it's one of those things. Collisions could work like fine 90% of the time, but that 10% is enough to put you off the experience.
You were talking also about the intertwining about between animation and what is behind in the engine and all that stuff. But I think there's also like another layer of complexity with your game specifically, the fact that the characters themselves are really cartoonish, so they have like super deformed proportions. So I think that could be also a challenge. The fact that you also add like 2D VFX and all that stuff, which I guess is also another layer to kind of convey.
Yeah.
And I also was playing like the demo again, and regarding towards the end and stuff, there are a lot of enemies in the screen. So how do you convey everything so it's readable and players, because these games, I struggle to kind of put everything into one question, but these games can be like so rewarding when you feel like you have like these split-second decisions that allow you to make this plan to, as you said, like I'm gonna move here so I can push this enemy to the other one, and that's when it comes like super satisfying because you feel like a god basically. So how do you allow players through the visual communication and visual cues to create those split-second plans in their head? You know?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to split this up into what are we doing to create a sense of fairness and balance, and also then how do we communicate to the players, right? For the fairness and balance side of things, the first thing I'll say is that Dark Souls and Sekiro and games like this. One thing that they do that's just brilliant is that people have pointed out that they're basically rhythm games.
We go
That
back to the music and the math behind it, right?
Exactly. And when I encountered that idea, that like, oh, Sekiro is a rhythm game or Dark Souls is a rhythm game, that blew my mind, because like how better to communicate to players, like than something. I think rhythm is this thing that we kind of, as human beings, we inherently tied to it. It speaks to us, right? And so if we start to detect a rhythm, then that's one way that the game is communicating to us, right?
Yeah.
And so that was one thing that I kind of realized in Denari and decided to implement in Denari early, was this idea that, okay, cool, everything in this game, it's not a rhythm game, but everything in this game runs at a pattern of 200 BPM at 200 BPM.
Okay.
And so you've got the attacks, ha ha ha, pause, ha ha ha, pause, ha. And there's a certain rhythm to that. And then you think of the beast, the guy with the axe. What's his cadence of movement? It's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so if everyone follows the sort of various rhythms, but at that beat pattern, then first of all, because everything is kind of rhythmic, it communicates to you what's happening, and you start to be able to make sense of the game and to predict what's going on, right? And predict what's going to happen next. And sort of, and on some inherent level, you're like, okay, cool, I'm starting to understand this, right? Yeah. But it's because the game is communicating these rhythms to you, right? And to explore difficulty in other ways, add different mechanics, add different, add different ways to here's one. We have two bosses that you fight at the same time, and we've implemented a system where they take turns doing combos. So this crazy combo happens with these two characters. And that's yet another way that we can push on difficulty without really messing with that spine. And I do think it is important to make hard decisions and say, here are the bounds that we're working within, and that there's that idea. Creativity blooms within constraints.
Definitely.
You pick your constraints and to be religious about them, and you'd be surprised at how much variety you can summon within those constraints.
I would like to know a bit about, the game has like a super cartoonish, like 3D style, and how do you end up landing into this identity? Like, which kind of references were you investigating? Because as you said, like the team is also really culturally diverse, and I would like to know how did that influence, the character design, the world building, and all that stuff,
Yeah. Okay. I think in terms of influences, so myself and Tamihana, I think one of our kind of like shared background that we have is that we really love like metal music. Okay. And like new metal music. And so like when looking at Tamihana's work, I kind of realized that a lot of his work, if you particularly his enemy design in Denari, you can kind of see that it's like Saturday morning cartoon meets like early 2000s rock band, kind of like, it's like new metal, that genre, it's like, it's got that new metal graffiti art type kind of influence, but as applied to Saturday morning cartoons, so I could say that his influences are games like Zelda, and Chrono Trigger, Akira Toriyama, Dragon Ball, in the anime side of things. But yeah, I would say that he really brought in that kind of like street art, graffiti art side of things into his art, right? And that forms an important influence to him. right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's so interesting that you touch about that because after all, the game, from what I understood, has a lot of themes regarding, invasion and how the power kind of can subjugate, whatever is back. And I've always seen graffiti as a part of, like, a sense of revelation. It has like this kind of reactive kind of sense to it. So it's so interesting that you kind of can mix those both worlds.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And then there's certainly the cultural influence on top of that, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, thematically, Denari, the story of Denari plays a lot with uh, our own cultural identities and that internal conflict that we might have between the culture at home and the culture of society at large, and um, and as a result, we end up, just naturally wanting to embed a lot of our own cultural influences into the characters and whatnot, particularly of the main character and his village and whatnot, and his the empire, sorry, the nation that he belongs to, rather.
Hmm.
Um, uh, when deciding the identity of them, we thought, okay, cool, let's take a bit of each of us
Yeah.
and put it into these characters in this world. And so you'll have weaponry. A lot of the weaponry is designed based on Maori bone carvings.
Hmm.
And then you'll have clothing that a lot of it evokes kind of like in Southeast Asia and South Asia, we'll wear saris and sarongs and things
Yeah.
like that. And so you'll see a lot of that in the costume design.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then this sort of extends to, okay, what's going on in the story and whatnot. Like the game starts during a festival of the goddess Kira. This is sort of like 500 years after she defeated some demonic force or whatever it is. It's sort of kind of known in the culture of the game. And in that moment, we're like, okay, cool. Well, what does a festival look like? And then so we start to derive from, okay, cool. What is Indians? We celebrate Diwali. I'm South Indian, so we celebrate our New Year is called Pongal.
Okay.
And so we're looking at Pongal and Diwali celebrations, and in those celebrations we'll draw murals on the floor,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then so we thought, okay, cool, like murals, making the ground really interesting is important when you're looking at that sort of isometric angle.
Definitely.
And so we thought, okay, cool. Well, we're in a festival season. Let's use that, and let's lean a lot on murals.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so it's like it's this reliable point of interest, well, point of like a pillar, a creative pillar for us.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, when we need to make a decision, we're like, okay, cool. Let's see what we can derive from our own cultures.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And how did that like also influence like your writing process? Because this is also something that can be like really challenging and really difficult to kind of nail down the fact that different characters have different tones, also have different backstories, which I think also ties down to what we're talking about, the different cultures and everything, how people approach, violence, how different cultures approach family and all that stuff. Like, how do you feel with that?
Yeah. Let me have a think here. Um, okay. So I suppose if we were to talk about the role of violence here in the culture and whatnot, we've sort of set up this main character who wants to join this order called the Apostles, and they are warrior monks, and there's 5 or 10 of them throughout this entire society. They're the best of the best,
Okay.
um, but I think the idea there actually stemmed from, like, I've practiced martial arts a little bit, for sort of 4 or so years. I was really into it, and what I've kind of discovered about martial arts is that you might even come into it being like, okay, cool, I want to understand violence, right? But you arrive there, and it's such a wholesome experience, if you go to the right gym.
Yeah.
They're like, no, we're about avoiding violence. We're about being able to respond to it when it occurs in our environment. We're about uplifting one another. We're about understanding ourselves. And I kind of took the approach of like, okay, cool. If we were to create this warrior monk kind of sect within society, that they would embody those values. That like we're about defense, we're about self understanding ourselves and rising to our higher self through our practice of martial arts, right? And so, and then of course, there are martial arts that we can point to with our own cultures, and that influences some of our animations and things like that. But not that I practiced, martial arts in the Indian context. But I think that that's the approach that we took to some of those story ideas.
Hear the fact that you have like so many different sources to tap into, and bring references from. Yeah, I like that a lot. And what you were saying about the warrior monks and all that stuff, kind of brings me back and makes me think about other series and other shows that we have in media, like the Avatar, the Last Airbender, things like that. I was wondering if, in that sense, you were thinking about the game or the story of the game more like a traditional hero's journey, or if we can expect some kind of twist or some different kind of narrative structure in that sense.
Okay, narrative structure. No. It's a great topic, because I think a lot of people sort of see a hero's journey as a generic or a tired or well worn in. But I found that a hero's journey was a great place to start. As a new writer, I kind of want to respect the idea that okay, well, part of our aim as indie developers is just to get good, and to sort of acknowledge that here's my skill level, right? And so maybe I want to mess with really cool narrative structures and whatnot later on, but let's start with a hero's journey here, right? The narrative structure that I like to follow is based on, have you seen Rick and Morty or Community?
Some seasons of Rick and Morty, yeah.
Yeah. So the writer Dan Harmon, he famously came up with the story circle, which is a condensed version of the hero's journey. It's like a 4-part sort of structure, and I also encountered this idea of Japanese poems and the structure that they use. They call it Kisho Tenketsu, which is very similar. You introduce an idea, you build upon it, you twist it, you resolve it, right?
So that's basically Nintendo's framework to game design, right?
Exactly. Yep. It's a game design framework. It's an effective storytelling framework. And so what we've done is very early on we plotted out the narrative spine of the game. It roughly follows this hero's journey structure, or this, or in a broad sense, this story circle or Kisho Tenketsu structure. So we know roughly what's going on in the story from beginning to end. This hasn't changed in since the early days of the game. And then when we also looked into each of the individual characters, the main characters. Okay, cool. What's their individual story arc? And so we roughly know where everyone is going to end up and what's going to happen to each of them based on this, based on their overall arcs that we've written years ago. And then when you're going into individual scenarios, like, okay, cool, let's figure out how this great battle, we're defending our capital city, and the enemies are coming in, and like how's this going to pan out, right? Well, when we zoom into that part of the story, we know what needs to happen because of those overall structures that we've already decided on, right? And so that answers.
You already have like limitations towards building towards something, right?
That's right. Yeah. And then within that chapter, we can also come up with a story circle for that, and so we write a story outline for that. And then within individual scenes, we write the story outlines for that. So it's very structured in the top-down kind of sense. And then by the time we're working on a piece of screenplay, we kind of know what's going to happen, what needs to happen. And we also have quite a strong idea of like what these character identities are and everything. And then from there, dialogue just happens. You kind of, if this character here has this sort of set of principles, and they conflict with this character's set of principles, you can start to see where the conflict in the dialogue will occur, right? And then from there, you've got the game. They actually literally where you have to go and fight stuff now, right? And that's happening in these patterns of 4 as well. And well, what do you know? We can start to slot in dialogue here and here and here, and the structure of this sort of 4-part cadence that's occurring in the story matches and ends up marrying with these 4-part scenarios that we use in combat, where we introduce a fire mage, and then from there we add in the fire mage with other characters, and then and then exactly, yeah. And so that idea of like a 4-part story structure and a 4-part game design framework, like those are hard limitations that we put on ourselves because we're new to this, a lot of people like they follow the sort of framework of like, oh, I'm a gardening writer or I'm a gardening game designer. I just feel it out, and I have no such skill.
Yeah, definitely, especially like as you said. I mean, there are lots of talented people out there, but I don't. I always thought about solo developers have these weird aliens that are like super talented and somehow make incredible games by themselves. But at least for me, like the rewarding part is getting together with other people and see everything grow. So in that sense, I think it's also really important to be aware of your resources. Like not everyone can, be plus 10 years working on their game. So as you said, you really have to be smart about what you can like achieve and what the scope of your game can be. So in that sense, I think starting, as you said, like having this pivot or this starting point of the hero's journey, I think is also super interesting, and I think it completely makes sense. After all, like the hero journey is something that is common across so many different cultures. That's something that we were talking about earlier, in Polynesian cultures, South American, Western. So the fact that you also tap into that multicultural background through this common archetype, I think is something that is super interesting to as you said, like work and maybe twist or try to find new ways to work on it. And, I would like to see how that final battle or final boss comes up. And I will also like to ask yourself about that final boss of getting money and getting funding and getting a publisher and all that stuff, like how did that happen? How long has the road been? What were the trials and tribulations of funding, getting to talk with publishers, the deals, whatever you can talk without stepping into it.
Yeah.
But I would like to know like your journey into it. Yeah.
Firstly, that is the greatest segue in an interview of all time. Okay, yeah, funding. Okay, so our first go at this was local opportunities. That there was this this competition that was running early. It still is, I believe, called Kiwi Game Starter, and it's sort of you apply. If you're a finalist, you're selected as one of the top 4 or 5 finalists, and you have to pitch your game in person at a local conference. And there's a panel of industry judges who decides who gets first, second, third, etc. Right? And we applied 3 times. So that's over 3 years, and we were rejected every single time. And so we've never, and we've never succeeded in this, in those sort of early years. And there was a couple of other opportunities that we were just applying to grants, like government grants. That these were like small art grants, but in over like 3-4 years of this, we got nothing. No, zero. The amount of funding that we got was zero. We tried to treat it also in the same way that you treat game design and whatnot. You put it in front of people, you get feedback, you try to figure out what to do better, and you try again. But I think maybe one of the things that we were missing was just that kind of overall perspective of like how does a publisher even think? How does an investor even think? And so without that context, we're applying for these funding applications, and they were very good at actually on their end. They have a good sense of how a publisher thinks, and so they're rejecting you with this context that they have that you don't. And it wasn't until we started to get coaching from. So, are you familiar with Code? I believe you met people from Code, New Zealand Code.
Was super nice at Gamescom, yeah.
Awesome. So New Zealand Code was a government initiative that started in a town called Dunedin. Like I'm going to say like 5 years ago. It was a long time. It was like a local thing, and then the government, they convinced the nationwide government that it's a good idea to make this a national program. And the idea is that they provide coaching first and foremost. That they introduced pitching workshops and things like that, so that you can go and give your games pitch. And they have decades of experience of working with publishers, working within publishers, working in grant bodies. They know exactly, this context that we are so starved of. And we go to these pitching workshops, and they just absolutely grill our pitchers, and to be like, they bring up things like, what is the differential of this game, right? I'm not, and you might say it's this telekinetic thing, right? But then how does that how's that expressed in the game, and why would that feel different to a player? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean? Like I would
you were cut off.
And then you and then you kind of realize that, okay, cool, I've been applying to all of these funding opportunities, but I've never really understood how the other side thinks. And and maybe I still don't to this day. But I can say that a publisher or an investor is probably thinking about, like, okay, cool, that idea of a differential, I think, is so important to them, because they're looking at, okay, cool, here's this ocean of games. How do we stand out? And that you being able to express a differential in the, it could be in the gameplay, it could be just in the artwork, it could be in the narrative, something, that gives them an idea that, okay, cool, hey, I know we can market this, and we can market this in an environment where there's so much attention fractured everywhere, and we can still stand out, right? So they're thinking about that, and then from there they're like, okay, cool, your high level idea is good. The next thing they'd ask themselves is, how about execution? Does the team have the competence to pull this off? And if you can paint a picture of that, this is one of the things that I struggled with, was just like, it was like, cool, okay, what have you done? What have you done as a team? And they'd ask me, like, what have you done? Or rather, I had this experience with investors where they're like, you specifically, like, you're odd in this team. The rest of your team have like experience working in game studios. But what have you done? And I'm like, I've just done this. I worked on a prototype for another game, and that doesn't look promising from the risk perspective, right? Because it's like, cool, you've got a great idea. I can see how it's different to other games, right? But can you pull it off? And that was a difficult sell for me, right? And yeah, so it's these kind of like the kind of perspective of the other side, the investors, is what we eventually got an instinct for, but it started off with just getting direct coaching, and from there it was, Code sponsored us to go to Gamescom. I went over there, I pitched to 11 publishers, and from there we went to various other conferences. I've pitched close to 30, I think, now. And in that experience, it was just like kind of getting the reps in, and eventually, building a picture of how it is that they think and what are they looking for,
And also like getting acquainted to rejection, which I think is important. We have to be like super endurant. Is that a word? I don't know. Like we have to resist so much in the game industry, and it's such a hit or miss industry. So the sense that you are, even if you got it, even if you got funding, even if you were able to successfully make your game, it might be a flop. And it's something that you have to be acquainted to and be okay with. And it's just another step, as you were said, of starting to build like the next thing, or start to build like your team to make something even better the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple more things that I just thought of, if you don't mind.
No,
because we've been talking about game design this whole time, right? And all of the passion and everything that goes into and the craft and the development of this craft and all of the work that goes into this. And then when sometimes I think the frustration when indies speak with publishers is that publishers can be a bit dismissive. They're like, okay, cool, well, I've heard your idea for 15 minutes. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm feeling this, right? But I think there's a lot of resentment and the rejection because of that. Because you're like, dude, I've worked on this for 3 years. Like, give me more time. Play play more of my demo. You'll get it. And I think
but in that sense, quick introduction. I think that's super important, and something that I don't know. Maybe it's because of my background, but I completely understand them in the sense that we're like, all of us have our brains fried up with TikTok and everything. So when I'm developing a game, I always strive for this trailer moment, the fact that you can see the mechanics super easy to understand and super impactful. So in that sense, I think your game can accomplish it really well. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to point that out. I think it's super important to think into these super small bits that convey the impact of the game. And that might not be for every game out there. Of course, there are some slow cookers, but it's something that it would be interesting to have in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I guess what I'll say is that like you know, to try and get into the head of the other side, imagine you've got 1,000 emails sitting in your inbox, and you're having to look at each of them. You're going to, and you're looking at, like 100 pitches, a week or something like that, right? You're doing your best. You're doing your best as a scout or whatever it is to be like, okay, cool. I'm gonna do this game justice, but I got to move on,
Yeah.
And when you think of it that way, like I think I started to realize all of that passion that I have, and all of that, like that thought and that effort that our artists have put in, and that sense of identity that they've started to build, it's got to appear in the pitch deck, right? Like it's got to be there. You got to be able to see it, And then once, and if they see it and you've conveyed it to them, they'll be like, oh, cool. All right, let's see now what this game is like, because you could kind of say that the pitch is like it's kind of like an explanation or introduction, right? Or even like you could say it's a set of claims. I claim that we can make this. And if they're bought into that claim, the next thing they do is like, okay, cool. Let's see if you can pull it off. And then that's answered by the demo. So the demo is really crucial, right? And then again, like all of that passion and that effort and all that sort of stuff, like that, you got to make sure that it's visible in 15 to 20 minutes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And you could look at there's some brilliant examples of this. Tunic is a really good example, and I believe they've done talks, or their publisher have done talks about how they designed their demo and whatnot. If you play, are you familiar with the game Tunic?
Yeah. But I did not play the demo, but I would need to check that talk out. Yeah.
Yeah. So their demo is basically like, cool, cute fox character turns up, picks up a sword, runs around, boss, straight away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it wastes no time getting to the point where you're like, oh, I get what this is about. I get what's so cool about this. You're very quickly introduced to what could be the peak of the art and the gameplay experience and all of that sort of stuff, right? So our initial demos were like, okay, hack and slash for 2 hours, and then you get your first telekinetic ability, And that's just not a great way to sell people on your differential or whatever it is, because they're gonna play for the 15-20 minutes they have allocated, and they're gonna be like, I'm not seeing what's so different about this, and they'll move on.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think this is also like maybe a long reach or a long stretch. I don't know English, but the fact that I think this is also a lesson that. Two seemingly separated worlds as they are indie game development and mobile games. This is something that there's a bridge there. The fact that the mobile development teams know exactly how important it is to grab the players in the first, 30 seconds, and how they drop players in each click and in each everything, and they try to be as streamlined as possible to kind of hook players in, with other methods and stuff. But this is something that I think we can learn definitely from their development.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a long stretch at all. I think again, with that limited attention span and things like that, they like they got to introduce you to what's so interesting very quickly. And it's a very similar thing with pitching to publishers.
Yeah. So publishers, you just touched on the P word. How did that actually happen? Like, what was the relationship with Ninja Kiwi? I think you touched upon it previously, but how did that actually became into a deal?
Yep. Okay. So when we first started working together, myself and Isabel and Tamiana, who worked within Ninja Kiwi, my initial worry was actually like, is Ninja Kiwi gonna sue me? And I was terrified of this, right? So like when we spoke about it, we were like, okay, guys, like don't say anything to them. Like if they ask about, we're gonna be at public conventions and stuff, so they got to know you're working on this. But like, I think that there's some game studios. Again, I'll say it, but I can't say who. But I know that there are some game studios that expect you to only work on their IPs, and if you work on anything in your spare time, it belongs to them now. This is literal clauses that you'll see in people's in contracts, which is, I think, silly. I think it's I think it's I'm not a fan of that practice, but it's common, And so, I had no idea what was going on there. So I thought, okay, cool. Oh God, like maybe they'll find out that we're working together and they'll sue me. So, but as time went along, they discovered obviously that these guys were working on this other game. It turns out, they, Scott, the CEO of Ninja Kiwi, he's actually worked in big companies in the past, and he's familiar with all of these bad practices that a lot of these other companies do, and so in Ninja Kiwi, he made it an explicit part of the culture there to be like, go work on your own stuff, because isn't that good for us? Isn't it good for you to go and get better at your craft and do things that you're passionate about and use the skills that you've learned here to go out into the world and do cool things? So it turns out they were just very encouraging of the whole thing. And as time went along, they also started to become interested in supporting other studios. And they just independently landed on this idea that, oh, cool, we should explore publishing. And that kind of lined up with us getting our first opportunities with Code. Code was the first, they were the first sort of party to ever take us seriously.
Yeah.
And the first thing they ever helped us out with was that a travel grant to send me to Gamescom. Sorry, I'm just getting vocal. So they sent me to Gamescom, and at that point, Isabel and Tamiana spoke to Scott about this, Scott from Ninja Kiwi, and it sort of informed him, hey, this is what's going on, etc. Oh, actually, I should rewind it a little bit as well. There was also a VC, a local venture capital firm that was also interested in us. Through these conversations and Tamihana letting Scott know about all of this, they started to realize that, oh, this is actually going somewhere, this is going somewhere with potential commercial merit. And they put their hands up. We're like, yo, you're looking for a publisher. How about us? Have you? Yeah. And so it was this really beautiful serendipitous thing, where you have what are the chances, that the artists that I work with work in such a supporting environment, just in terms of encouraging them to go pursue their craft after hours. And then that they start to land on this idea that actually we can start to support other studios. And why not start by looking at what our senior staff are doing, and adding fuel to that fire, So that, I think, sums up how this whole thing became even a topic, because it wasn't something that Ninja Kiwi initially intended, and I was scared they were going to sue me,
And suddenly you have a publisher asking for your game. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can talk about publishing dates or release dates or something like that, but I was wondering about what will happen that day. What do you hope Denari achieves for Astronaut Diaries as a studio, and what can we expect after that? Are you thinking about some DLCs for the game? Are we thinking about doing something completely new? How do you approach, because, game development is something that it takes so long. And as we said earlier, it can get so abrupt in the sense that you just launch and now it's out of your control in a sense. Of course, you can always, patches and stuff, but how do you envision that day and what comes after that,
Yeah. Okay. In terms of a release window, we are aiming for this year. But beyond that, if you could wait until we figure that out exactly, I'll let you know then. But so what happens on release day and beyond? We have this idea of what Denari is in terms of this game, but also the world that it exists in, and what the magic system of that world is, and I think that could be the basis for other titles, right? And it could be the basis for a wider IP. We know, for instance, that I grew up on Final Fantasy games. And in a Final Fantasy game, the first thing you do is, the joke is you go and kill some rats or something straight away, and at the end of the game, it's kill God. Like it escalates. They're like, oh, I'm going to kill fate itself.
Yeah.
And I thought that it's more responsible to, rather than focus on world-ending stakes, to actually focus on minor stakes. Like to zoom in on this is pretty much kind of like a political conflict in a way, right? The story of Denari, we're talking about an empire called the Denari, and this is their encounter with the people of the Isle of Kira, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of thought it would be really interesting to potentially, over the course of several games, to show the decline of an empire. If you read a history book, it's typically these interesting anecdotes of here's what occurred in this one period of history, and then the wider narrative will be something like, okay, cool, here was the fall of the Roman Empire, or here was the fall of the British Empire, and I thought it would be really interesting to do something like that over the course of many games, in terms of by showcasing these narratives, zooming in on these narratives that, I guess, tell the story of the decline of the Denari Empire, the slow decline over hundreds of years, and that Denari 1, this first game, would be the first sign of trouble for the Almighty Empire,
Yeah. That's so interesting, that the fact that you are already like thinking or fantasizing about having different perspectives on it, I guess also different characters, and what that will allow you to, how it will allow you to show different kind of sides of this small political conflict that sadly is quite current at the moment. So yeah. Okay, so I think we're almost reaching the end, Shrikkanth. I would like you to ask, through this whole development process, this whole creative process, a couple of years of development, what would you say would be like the most rewarding part for you? Like, like this thing that has been like super rewarding, or this thing that has been like super cherished, maybe some moment with your crew or something like that,
Yeah. The first answer that came to my mind was my team. That they, I think, had no rational reason to believe in me or believe in this project, and I, for the first 4 years, it's such a long time, 3-4 years, I felt like I was leading them towards failure, where it was like we're just going up against all of these funding applications, and it was like rejection constantly. And there was even our initial encounters with venture capital and publishers, where it was like failure. And I remember getting to, I think, what I would describe as my rock bottom, in this whole journey, which was we were in this 4-month-long conversation with an investor, and they kind of eventually just said no. And I had sort of sold this to my team as like, yes, it's finally happening, guys. It's fine. We're finally going to get jobs in, like working on our dream game or whatever. And I had nothing to show for it. And I remember, I kind of do this practice that I picked up from Stoicism, which is imagine the worst case, and then ready yourself for the worst case. And in that moment, I thought, okay, the worst case is that my whole team is going to think this is a joke, and they're going to leave. And then so I thought, okay, cool. Let me prepare myself for that scenario. Okay, cool. And I kind of went through this. Okay, we'll reduce what Denari is into this kind of cool combat prototype thing. Release it on its own. Maybe I can convince them to help me with this or that. And then I'll sit down for a meeting with them, each of them one-on-one, and get the sense for where they're at with this project.
Yeah.
And we had David, our musician, Isabel, a 3D artist, and Tamihana. I sat down with each of them, and all of them were like, "No, we're good. We're good to keep going. Yep, let's see it through to the end."
Yeah.
And they're like, without batting an eyelash, their response was, "No, we're with you to the end." And yeah, and then, obviously, like, get off the call, cry my eyes out, and then be like, okay, cool.
No, but I think that's,
Um,
I
let's get
mean,
back to work.
it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the resilience and the fact that you had a team that was willing to follow you and actually see the value in what you are doing. I think that's, so rewarding after all. And that's what games is about, human experiences, human connections. So the fact that you have people backing you up, I think is super, super important. And speaking about backing you up, Shrikant, where can people look at what you guys are doing at Astronaut Diaries? Like, where can we find you? This is your opportunity to plug anything, basically.
Okay, brilliant. The best place to follow us for general updates would be our Blue Sky page. And I think I'll pass you the link to that because I couldn't recite it off the top of my head. Blue Sky page. Please do give us a wish list on Steam. If you'd like to, if you check out our Steam page, just find Denari on Steam. And from Blue Sky, potentially our Steam as well, you could follow onto our Discord, and from there you could follow all of our sort of more day-to-day updates and keep and talk to us and ask us anything. So I think those would be the three places that are best to find us. But I'll follow up with Jorge on that as well.
Yeah. So from our side, this has been all. Make sure to give Shrikkanth and Denari a follow and a Steam wish list. And we'll see you again in the next ones, okay? Pleasure, Shrikkanth. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much, man. This is a lot of fun.
Bye
See ya.
bye.